Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast, joining me via Zoom, is my friend Sara Sumsion. Welcome to the podcast, Sara.
Hi, Richard. Thank you.
Last July, when YSA wards were split between age groups, or potentially, Peggy Fletcher Stack, a friend of mine, and had me come to record a podcast about single adults, since I've served in that space. And one of the other guests on the podcast who totally blew my socks off and impressed me is Sara Sumsion. And I made a note to get Sara back on the podcast to share her journey in the church, to share her Mother's Day lesson. We're recording this before Mother's Day. I think a lot of people try to navigate how to teach Mother's Day, either sacrament meeting or priesthood or Relief Society. And if you're trying to figure out that, maybe Sara, in the second part of her podcast, will have some thoughts for you. I thought it was really insightful. But Sara is just an ally to everybody. In her ward and leadership position, she's done amazing work to help everybody feel welcome, loved, supported. I have a gay friend that's been in her ward who has just felt so loved and accepted in that ward and has had choppy experiences in his journey being gay and a Latter-day Saint, and just recognize the work that's being done in that ward and put this good man to work, and Sara's friendship of this fellow. So she's going to talk a little bit about, her personal story that includes family leaving the church, kind of a choppy mission experience, becoming an ally, kind of thinking about what if I left the church, and then sort of her story to stay. And then the second part will be her thoughts about Mother's Day, Heavenly Mother, and all the tender topics. I love when people talk about those things on the podcast. Professionally, she's working on a master's degree to be a marriage and family therapist, which sort of gives us an insight into her soul to want to bless people professionally with her clinical work and her understanding of healing people. Is that okay, Sara, for an introduction?
Yeah, that is great. Thank you.
And I'm kind of a Sara, you got to have it spelled right in your brain. So she is an S-A-R-A, no H, Sara. Is that right?
That is very right. Yeah, so very important. I
think that's important.
Distinction there.
And Sumsion is spelled S-U-M-S-I-O-N. And with that, we'll turn it over to you, Sara.
Okay, well, thank you. I wasn't really sure what to talk about with Mother's Day and all of this, but also kind of telling my story. And I've listened to quite a few episodes of your podcast before, and I love it. And I love the way that you are able to kind of get people to tell their story. So I thought I'd share a little bit about that before we get into the Mother's Day aspect of it. So I think we'll start kind of from the beginning, and the beginning starts when I was 15. My parents started going through a divorce, and it was a divorce that nobody saw coming, including them. And to their credit, both of them, they're very amicable. Last week, we all got together for my sister's birthday, them and their new spouses. We all went to dinner. It was great. They're very amicable, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But part of that divorce was my dad's exodus from the church. And I had seen family members, friends, people leave the church before. But for lack of a better phrase, it made sense for them. I could kind of see the writing on the wall. I could see they didn't really fit in the church to begin with. I wasn't all that shocked when they left. My dad left at the height of activity. He had been Elders Quorum president, and he at the time was Young Men's president, and was very much on track to be bishop one day. And we had this family with these parents and then 4 kids, and we all went to church and we all did all the things, and my parents were functional and they loved us. And then all of a sudden, kind of everything came crashing down. And I remember when my dad left, I was so angry with him. I couldn't understand how he could leave this thing that he spent my entire life teaching me, And I also just kind of felt like it was almost a betrayal to me. Because I was like, wait, if you don't believe this, why did you teach me all of this? What's going on? And he had been brought up quite differently than I was, whereas my parents kind of gave us a choice and encouraged us to be in the church. It was kind of just expected of him. And his parents, they wanted that to be what their kids did, and they did it in the most loving way possible, and they were so great. But at the same time, it just was expected, and he kind of became the golden child, especially after all these callings. He served a mission in Jamaica, and he came home and he got married in the temple, and they immediately had their 4 kids, and he was this model citizen of the church kind of thing. So for him to leave was so surprising, that still it's only within the last couple of years that some people in our old ward have even realized that he left the church. A lot of people thought he just got a stake calling, and so that's why he wasn't at church anymore. And he's come to all of my siblings' farewells and homecomings, and they're like, "Oh, Mike, what's your calling now? You must be so high up." And he's like, "Nope, I left the church over a decade ago." So I just remember being so devastated at the time. And then about 3 years later, it was time for me to serve a mission. And I knew that I had always wanted to serve a mission since I was 6 years old, and I learned that girls could serve missions. It was my plan. I was going to go after a few years of college, and then the age change happened, and I was able to go at 19, and it was so fun. So my dad, even though I know he had a hard time with me leaving, he was very supportive of me going, and was very supportive while I was out. And I remember on my mission, people would say to me, you know, if you are exactly obedient, if you practice exact obedience, it will bring your dad back to the church. That is the magic key. And I remember saying to them, "Oh, I hope not." Because I knew enough by that time that my dad was a much happier person being out of the church. And he had gotten a lot of peace by leaving. And that's when I kind of started to realize that although the gospel can bring happiness, and it should bring happiness, that should be the main goal. Sometimes it doesn't to a lot of people, and especially with the way that my dad was doing things, where he was so all or nothing, black and white. It didn't bring him joy, and it was not something I wanted for him anymore. And I knew that he was happier outside of that. And so to see that was this really cool moment where I was like, oh, I don't have to be angry with him anymore for leaving, because he did what was best for him. And even though that was really hard for me, it kind of opened up the door to seeing, hey, there are other ways to do this. So while I was on my mission, I had great companions. My trainer was so great, but she very much was all about exact obedience. And that was something that was very emphasized in our mission, was exact obedience always, no matter what. And I'm a person, as much as I say my dad lived in the black and white of the church, I have always lived in the gray of life. I don't think that there are very few situations where I think a black and white mindset is healthy. And that's why I'm so grateful that my dad doesn't have that anymore with the church. And I didn't have that either. And so I remember very distinctly my trainer, we would get home late, 2 minutes late from a lesson, and she would say, okay, we have to call the zone leaders immediately, confess our sin of being late. And I would say, oh my goodness, okay, we ran late because a prayer ran long. We were not out gambling. We were not out getting ice cream. We were not out doing anything. We were late because a prayer ran long. But to her, the letter of the law was much more important than the spirit of the law. And that was hard for me. But once again, she was my trainer. I was here. a few weeks into my mission, I started experiencing really bad panic attacks. And I knew what they were. I was diagnosed with anxiety very, very young, like 6 or 7. So I knew what they were. But to have them in this context was concerning because this was something that I had wanted for so long. And so I did what I was supposed to do. And I went and I talked to my mission president and I said, I am struggling with this. This is really hard and I don't want to go home, but this culture of exact obedience and this culture of the way our mission was run much more like a corporation than a mission. It was all about numbers. And you were very much punished if you didn't meet those numbers. And so I remember sitting in this stake center classroom with him, and he asked me if I had my mission call with me, and he told me to bring it. And so I brought it and I brought it out, and he said, you see how it says at the end here that you'll serve for 18 months. Well, if you believe anything less than that, then that means you have no belief in Christ. And that shocked me. And he offered to let me call my mom, which was huge. This was back in the day before you had phone calls home, except for Mother's Day and Christmas. And so he let me dial my mom's number and then grabbed the phone out of my hand and proceeded to talk to my mom about how I was being a disappointment to him and I was disappointing the Lord, and she needed to talk some sense into me. And I was able to talk to my mom, and I was able to kind of tell her what was going on and that I was struggling. And she was so kind. She was so nice, encouraging me. It's okay. It's growing pains. It's adjustments. You can get through this. It's okay. And so I went through the next few months, and every morning I would wake up, and I would wake up about an hour before we were supposed to because my body was sick. I was so sick. And so I would just be sick for an hour, and then I would buckle up and I would just go in for the rest of the day and try my best not to panic and cry. The rejection from knocking doors was overwhelming. I had family stuff going on at home. I had a 3-month baby sister at home, who I had left behind that was making me homesick, and everything. Every week I'd send an email to my mission president. Hey, this is how the week went. And he would send back an email reminding me to not be a disappointment to him, to my parents, to the Lord. I ended up getting into the mission counselor, and we were able to talk about some of the issues I was having, and it was so great. But the mission counseling office was in the same building as the mission office. So I'd come out of that session and I'd feel great, and I would come face to face with my mission president and think, oh, okay, time to go back in. I don't know if I actually can handle this. And he was very, very berating and very belittling. And it's been over a decade since I came home, and I've looked back on that time, and I've, towards the end of my mission, I got a brand new companion who wasn't my trainer. All of a sudden we were equals, and she saw the panic in my eyes. And I think she has since become my best friend. I'm godmother to her little boy. We talk every single day. But I have asked her since then, was this all me? Was I over dramatizing what the president did? He gets so much praise from so many missionaries. And he recently passed away. And when he passed away, there were so many eulogies to this man about how his tough love had saved these people, and he was so beloved. And I asked her, was it my fault? Was it me? Was I over dramatizing this? She said, no. She said, even with me serving the full 18 months, serving in the visitor center, doing all the right things, she said, I still felt very little love from them, he and his wife, and I felt very, very chastised. And she said, and I had like what was supposed to be the experience. She's like, you were the outlier, and I'm sure that your experience, and I've shared with her everything that happened. She was there. She said, your experience was it just was not supposed to be like that. And I'm so sad that it was. So after about 5 months, I got to a point where, and I've actually heard in the years since that this is a fairly common experience for people who are experiencing mental health crises on their mission, where I would think to myself, okay, we need to get in a car accident that is severe enough to hurt me so I can go home and be honorably released, but I don't want to die. And so I would think that we'd be driving back from the mission home, and I think, okay, we're going about 70 miles an hour. If I jumped out right now, I think I would survive, but I think it would break enough bones that I could go home, and it wouldn't be my fault that I went home. And so as I started to think that, I expressed this to my mission therapist. He's like, oh, this is common. People think this. It's okay. It's a stressful time. And I finally looked at him one day and I said, Brother Gale, I think that these are suicidal thoughts. And I don't want to die, but to want to hurt myself enough, I think I'm suicidal here. And it was within the week that he had called the mission president, and the mission president, with no consultation to me, no letting me know, he called our apartment one morning and didn't talk to me. He talked to my companion. He said, Sister Scott, tell Sister Sumsion to be ready by 5 o'clock tonight. She will be going home tomorrow.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember I didn't get to speak to him. He didn't want to speak to me. And I just remember crying in my companion's arms that night. And I felt like I had failed. And I felt like there was no coming back from this. And when he and his wife picked me up that night and they took me out to dinner, of all things, and I did not want to be there with them. I wanted to be either back with my companion or home. And I remember him sitting in front of me and he said, Sister Sumsion, this is not how I wanted things to go. And I said, you know what? This is not how I wanted things to go either. And he seemed genuinely surprised by that. I've learned in the years since that he thought that I was manipulating the entire system to be able to go home. And I just kept thinking, if I wanted to go home that badly, I could have, and I could have just said, let's go home. I was lucky that my dad had left the church, because when I got home, he was there, and he was able to put aside any callousness that he had towards the church. And once he knew, especially the extent of my mission president and everything that he had done and the abuse there, he wanted to call my mission president and go out to Missouri. He went into full protective dad mode, but he also was able to put that aside and just be there for me and let me grieve how I needed to grieve. And I wasn't saddled with any church pressure because I was around him, and that was so nice. So it ended up being the blessing that I needed. I didn't need the blessing of my dad returning to the church. I needed the blessing of him having kind of a way to compartmentalize and take a step back and be there for me instead. So yeah, in the years since, it's been a lot of figuring all of that out. The mental health aspect of it, I think, led me to my current career doing marriage and family therapy. I want to specialize in early returned missionaries. I think especially in the early 2010s to 2017, 18, when they changed the rules to calling home, the stigma then especially was so rough. I remember the day that they changed the rules that you could call every day or every week, sorry. And I just remember I wrote a big long Instagram post about how I was angry at first, and then I was just relieved because my brother was out, and my brother didn't need to call us. He was bugged. he was like, oh, leave me alone. I don't need to talk to you people every week. But I kept thinking about how if I had had that, it wouldn't have made me stay out any longer. I was out for the exact amount of minutes that the Lord needed me to be. But I would have had more support along the way. And so as these policies have changed, as stuff like that has changed, it would have been very easy for me to be resentful and say, well, if you could have done this, if this could have been a thing all along the way, why wasn't it when I was out? Why didn't I have this option when my mission president was there and he was berating me and he was just making life miserable? Why wasn't this an option? And it's been very similar to the discourse I've seen recently with the new garment designs coming out. I've seen a lot of people, a lot of members who have left the church saying, well, how come all those years I had to wear garments that went to a certain point on my shoulder and now it's being changed? Why, if it could have been changed then, why couldn't it? Why wasn't it? Why is this all of a sudden being changed? And I've considered over the years, okay, do I just throw in the towel and say, you know what, enough is enough? And I've talked to plenty of people and they're like, with what you've been through, with everything that's happened, you get to leave the church, and you probably should. And you probably we're surprised you haven't. And I got to the point where I decided I needed to make a choice where I could leave or I could stay, but I couldn't do both. And along the way, I was slowly being introduced to more and more concepts that were foreign to me. And one of those things that radicalized me the most, it was becoming an LGBTQ ally. And that's not something I ever expected for myself. I grew up insulated in Davis County, and that was, we would take, my mom was great about us traveling growing up, going on road trips. And I remember going to New Orleans when I was 16, and my sisters saw so many more Black people than they ever expected. And they were panicky, and I was just fascinated. And same thing, anytime there was Salt Lake Pride, I didn't think much of it. I knew traffic was going to be a little bit worse. I didn't think anything much of it. And then in 2021, I made friends with my coworker who was non-binary. Mm. And I was panicky. And I actually wrote an Instagram post about it. And so I'll just read kind of that because I was able to put it into words there. I said, pride was never personal for me. I didn't have gay family members, close friends, and I'm not gay, even if I sometimes wish I was when I see the dating app prospects. I didn't think anything more of it except for knowing traffic in downtown Salt Lake City would be heavier that weekend. Then a couple of years ago, I met someone who permanently changed my perspective. They were the first non-binary person I'd ever knowingly encountered, and I was thrown off. I didn't know how to use they, them properly and was worried that if I messed it up, I'd become an enemy to the entire LGBTQIA community. I decided to try my best, though, and I learned a couple of very important things. I learned that if I was making an effort, they weren't going to get offended and would even tease me, stressed out about it. This led to many jokes and stories that I still love. More importantly, I learned that their gender identity and who they love was of course essential and important, but it was also the least interesting thing about them. This hilarious, caring, and lovingly scatterbrained person was so many things, and I wouldn't have known any of them without opening my mind and heart. So now I wholeheartedly support Pride as an ally, for the person who changed my perspective, for the family members who have come out, for the families who desperately want a child as their own, and for one of my best friends who's happier living her truth, loving a woman than she ever was with her husband, and for all of the people who are told that the world would be better off without them. It's not loving the sinner, but hating the sin. It's not a sin to love. Jesus walking among the marginalized and outcast, doing his best to love them. That's what he would still do today. Love them, not in spite of who they love, but because of who they are.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you. So it became kind of a part of me, and it still is to this day. My siblings tease me, and they ask, okay, well, you talk about being an ally, you talk about all this stuff. Are you sure you're not gay? Are you sure? And if I were, I don't necessarily think that they'd be super okay with it, but the fact that they're asking, I'm proud of them for that. My 19-year-old sister, she kind of has a thing whenever we're alone, she'll turn to me, is there anything you need to tell me yet? Nope. You know what? I have a lot of very pretty friends, and I wish I was in love with them, but I'm not. Unfortunately, just very, very straight. And so I got to this point, and becoming an ally also opened me up to even more. Hey, there are problems in the church when it comes to how they handle LGBTQ people. There are problems in the church with how they handle the children of LGBTQ people. And it was another really big turning point for me. And so I went to the Lord in prayer, as I think you should for anything big or small. But I also went to my best friend, that same companion from all those years ago. And she and I had miraculously landed in almost the exact same place, where we were both kind of at this point where we don't want to leave, but how do you stay, and how do you explain to somebody that you're part of this church that doesn't always treat these people with the most kindness? And so I took a step back, and I looked at what would staying mean? What would it look like? And as much as being a cafeteria Mormon has always been discouraged, it's always been told to us, like, can't pick and choose what parts you have to be all in. I learned that it was kind of what I needed to do. And one thing that has solidified it for me and made me stay, there are two major things, but one, I realized that if the apostles came out tomorrow and they said, gotcha, it was all a hoax, this whole time it's been a big joke, Joseph Smith wasn't real, none of it was real, this is it's been the biggest prank, it's a multi-billion-dollar prank, I of course would be shocked and devastated, but that's not what my testimony is built on. At the end of the day, it's just me and God. And that happens whether or not the church crumbles. Me and the gospel and me and Jesus were good. And so I realized that if I could keep that at the center of my testimony, that I could stay and do the second part of this, which was I can do more work and I can do more good from the inside out. I see so many people, and their hearts are in the right place, where they're disgruntled ex-members, and they're speaking out, and they're doing good things. They're trying to bring a light to the problems that appear. All they're seen as are these scorned ex-Mormons. And I realized that if I could stay being a diligent member of the church, somebody who is trusted, and that was I'm the person I've always been, that I could help people. And last year I talked to my dad about this, because over the years, it wasn't all rainbows and butterflies of he left the church and I had this awakening and he was great. We've butted heads for sure. And there was this moment where we were talking, and I said, Dad, I just want you to be proud of me, and I just want you to recognize the work that I'm doing by staying in the church, because I want the church to be a different church than the one that you left. I want this to be a more inclusive place. And the best way I know how to do that is to be in Relief Society presidencies and to be in these wards and to speak up when I hear about policies that I don't agree with and that could be harmful to people, and to speak up with little things like being in the Relief Society presidency, and they would want to do random drop-bys at people's houses that we hadn't seen in years. And I'd say, no, we're not going to randomly drop in on people. We're not going to do that. We're going to give them an option. We're going to give them agency if they want to talk to us. And I kind of took over communications. And so I would text these sisters and I'd say, hey, this is who I am. We have you listed in our ward. You do not have to reply back to me at all. If you want us to check in on you every 6 months, will you just heart this message? If you want to be taken off of our communications completely, will you just thumbs down this message? And that's, if you want us to come visit you immediately, reply for sure. But if you don't want this, that's okay. And I learned that from my dad. I learned that the random drop-bys, he even at the height of his activity was very uncomfortable doing that. And so it was these little things that I realized that I could be in the church and I could be so involved in this and do this, but I could do it my way and the Lord's way and what the Lord's way is for me. And I feel like it's the same way I did my mission. I was just trying my best, and the exact obedience did not work for me. We had tracting requirements every day. We had to tract, and what that meant for most people is you go out and you tract for hours. And I said, okay, we have to tract every day. And I told my companion, my now best friend Liz, I said, Liz, or Sister Scott, we're going to tract 3 houses a day. If they answer, great, we'll talk to them. If they don't, that still counts as a house. And that was the way I could do it and keep my anxiety under control. And I've still done that, where whatever that means is what the Lord wants for me. And I try really, really hard to kind of keep that in mind. But I realized that I just want to be good for the people in the church and good for the people outside of the church. My current roommate is not a member of the church. She's not from anywhere around here. I was the first Mormon she met. And I told her when I moved in, I am LDS. Here's what that means. But I call it a little bit more nuanced Mormonism. And also, I promise I'm not weird. I'm going to be the most normal Mormon you've ever met. I promise. And that's kind of become a little bit of the mission of, I promise I'm not going to shove anything down your throat. Any questions you have, any of the weird questions, you come to me. She's come to a temple open house with me. She has asked all the questions. She knows all the terminology now. And it's doing that feels like much more genuine missionary work than anything I ever did in Missouri. And I love being able to do that. And so a big part of that came last year when I was conducting in May, and I was asked to find somebody to teach the Mother's Day lesson. And I think this is how you and I kind of got this connection and this idea to do this, is I told you about my Mother's Day lesson. And it was really important to me for this lesson. I debated, okay, who do I ask? Who of our teachers could do justice to this important topic? And then I realized that I just wanted to do it. There were so many women in the ward. And at that point, we hadn't had the age change yet. And so we had this range of women who were 18 to 35, 36, all at different stages of life, and all at different stages of wanting to be mothers or not. There were some of my very closest friends that had this yearning and this ache to be mothers, and the fact that they were approaching 30 and they weren't moms yet was devastating. And I knew this is going to be hard for them. Okay. And then I knew some women in the ward that did not want kids, and it wouldn't be right for them to teach it either. And so I said, okay, I will just do this myself. And we are not, at no point during this lesson am I going to say that every woman's calling and purpose is to be a mother. Because I grew up hearing that. I grew up that my purpose was to be a mother, and I was foreordained. Men got the priesthood and I got to be a mom. And I said, I don't love that. I don't love that. And so instead I decided to focus on a few things. First of all, and in the most basic sense, I think Relief Society is motherhood just by taking care of each other. I love that women get to minister to women in Relief Society. And I love that in initiatories in the temple, women get to minister to women there as well. And so it's the original sorority. It just is this sisterhood. And I very much emphasize that, and how ministering is really this form of motherhood. And I also quite controversially decided that Heavenly Mother was a really, really important part of this. I wanted to talk about how I grew up hearing that the reason we don't discuss her is because the Lord knows that people already take his name in vain, and he didn't want that for his wife. And I understand the sentiment of that, but it's just not great. And if I know anything about this woman, I think she, first of all, can take care of herself, and second of all, wants to be loved and she doesn't need the praise, but she helped create us. There are so many parts of this life that I think only Heavenly Mother could have created. I look at my brother. I have one brother. He's amazing. And I look at him and I think, you know what? There are some parts of you that only Heavenly Mother could have made. These ways that you understand all four of your sisters and your empathy. I don't think this could have come from Heavenly Father. No discredit to him, but I think this came from your Heavenly Mother. And I think it takes two parents. And as much as we emphasize proclamation to the family, how we emphasize so much on here on earth that should be two parents, that doesn't always translate. That we say like Heavenly Mother had just as much of a hand in all of this. And in the most basic of terms, I've talked to my best friend about this, and she's an interior designer, and she's like, do you think Heavenly Father made it all this pretty? Because any man I've ever met does not focus on the aesthetics of a house. And I agree. I think the Lord was really good about building the foundation, and Heavenly Mother said, it needs flowers, and it needs to be pretty and pleasing to the eye, because there needs to be joy in that. So yeah, I love talking about her, and I loved including that in the lesson. I love being hers. It's such a cool thing. And I think Mother's Day is an opportunity to be grateful for that, and to kind of reflect on her role in all of it. It was such an interesting lesson to be able to do it, and it was hard. I got some backlash afterwards, which was expected and totally fine. I didn't think I would be approaching 30 and be unmarried. I did not think that I would be a Jane Austen cliche. But I have friends who ache to be mothers, and I have friends who are very much okay being the crazy aunt, in their own words. And wherever you land between those two things or neither, I think it's important to emphasize, especially to women, that you are more than just your ability to bear children. And that you don't necessarily have to have this ache to be a mother. I remember when growing up on Mother's Day, they would have all the women stand up and they would give them the gift. And as much as I appreciate a chocolate bar, I was just kind of like, I don't need to be included. I don't need to be included in this because I'm not a mother and I don't know that I ever will be. And I've seen women that I very much admire in the church who have taken a step back, especially on Mother's Day, and they will say, you know what, I'm okay. I'm going to go spend it with my own mom. I don't need to go and partake of the chocolate or the flowers or whatever it was. And I was glad they didn't do anything like that in the singles ward. We very much expressed appreciation for our bishop's wife, and anybody there who was a mother. In my current ward, we have a single mother who's in there, and it's so fun. She brings her son, and on Mother's Day, we will show all that appreciation for her, but I don't need anybody telling me that because I have this divine ability to bear children that I need that. And I feel like we don't do that on Father's Day. When I'm like, you'll be a father one day. It's not the same. And I appreciate the appreciation that they're trying to give to women, but there's so many more facets to Mother's Day that I think it's okay to take a step back and focus on Heavenly Mother and what motherhood has brought all of us.
Sara, you packed a lot into 37 minutes. Powerful podcast. And this is where I share the things, listeners, that I kind of wrote down. We kind of have a discussion, but you covered a lot of ground. This could be 4 podcasts.
It could.
This is a beautiful love story with your dad, that there's elements of your dad's story and multiple parts of your story. And I just think that's a beautiful part of the story. And your mom and her being safe for you as you opened up during your mission. I love you being honest about the difficult experience with your mission president on your mission. This is a space, listeners, where we kind of have this theme line: when we know better, we do better. If we don't talk about difficult experiences, we don't sometimes have a way to do things better. And so my younger self would have been maybe dismissive of you, or are you overthinking it, or kind of be a natural ally to your priesthood leader who was more like me in my age. My older self has learned to just sit with people in the pain and not make them prove it. Just validate the difficult experience you had and your courage to navigate that and your courage to talk about it. And just wants to put my virtual arms around you and say, I'm so sorry that here you are wanting to do everything you can, and you get in this very difficult, toxic situation. It's kind of a toxic relationship. Yeah. And not helpful, not healthy, not, I think, God's plan for you. Just really, really unfortunate. So there's silver linings, but it doesn't dismiss the complexity and the pain of that. There's a silver lining in your dad's role in this missionary companion that becomes your lifelong friend, but it still doesn't excuse the pain or dismiss the pain. So I'm so glad you shared that, and I'm so sorry you went through that, and it's not right.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
I love this finding the gray theme you have. That's sort of your personality.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing. So I'll keep reading. I love you the courage to talk about anxiety. That's not a spiritual weakness. It's not a deficit. It's just the reality. Mental health issues come to good people. And you understand that. I wrote down spiritual manipulation, if I'm using the right term, listeners, where your mission president read from your mission letter. And I think an inappropriate spiritual manipulation, or maybe a better term, to cause an outcome that he thought was the right outcome, but took off free agency. And spiritual manipulation can be really painful because you're a missionary wanting to do what's right, and you're sort of met with this sort of tactic that is really difficult. I don't know if you have better words for spiritual manipulation.
Spiritual manipulation is a really good word for it. My friend Liz, she used the term spiritual abuse.
Yeah, it's better.
And that I had never associated with that term. I had never really connected that. And then between that and a few other experiences, I was like, oh, wow, you're right. There's spiritual manipulation and spiritual abuse there, it's a very powerful tool to yield.
It is. And especially if you've got a personality type that wants to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge with spiritual abuse, we could do that as parents and church leaders and cause an outcome we think is best, but it's against Satan's plan, in my opinion, which is agency.
Yeah.
And really letting people own their own decisions and having the confidence in them and the plan and in God to let people make their own decisions. And sometimes I hear that when we are baptized, at that point, we've covenanted for men to serve a mission. We've already made that decision. I've heard that brought up at times, and I don't agree with that, listeners. It's just, to me, it's spiritual manipulation. It doesn't, we want people to go on missions, but then we can't go down this road of manipulating people. And I've been guilty of this to create the outcome that I think is best for them. I think it backfires in the long run.
Oh, for sure.
I thought you were honest about your car accident, and just it helps us understand the pain of your situation as you're thinking of suicidal ideation or harm. That's not a healthy environment.
No.
And then you talk about, one of the reasons you're in school right now, which isn't easy. It costs money and there's a lot of work to do, is just because you love people and you're wanting to help really release missionaries. And when you talked about that, I got a little emotional, Sarah, because it's an insight in your heart. You're taking this really difficult experience and you wanting, because you know this road. And sometimes we read this quote, listeners, the wounded healer. A minister's service will not be perceived as authentic unless it comes from a heart wounded by the suffering about which she speaks. The great illusion of leadership is to think others can be led of a desert by someone who's never been there. So you knew the desert of spiritual abuse on your mission.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly wounding, but your ability to walk that road and then your clinical and your academic understanding, you're already the wounded healer because of what you're doing with other people. And so I just thought it was great. I thought I wrote down the word respectful, and I can't remember the context of that, so I'm going to skip that. I love your testimony, and there's a lot of people in my world that are trying to stay in the church. There's some people like you understand and give space for people that are separating themselves from the church, but there's a lot of people actually who are trying to stay and stay in an authentic way that's not just fake or not. And so they're looking for some sort of new model. Their old model of everything works and everything doesn't, black and white, is no longer working. And they need a new model. And I thought what I wrote down here for you, Sarah, is you have a sustainable testimony. And it's a credit to you and the work you've done. And it may not work for everybody. You're careful about that. But then I kind of, in a funny note, wrote, maybe my old self would have said, well, a cafeteria Mormon's the road to leave the church. And then I wrote this. I said, maybe a cafeteria Mormon is the slippery slope to being able to stay.
No, it's true.
And
it's very, very true. It's one of those things. And like you said, it's not for everybody. And some people with different personality types need to adhere to everything. And that's just fine. But I saw, even just with one example, I saw that trainer of mine with the exact obedience and beating herself up and being so hard on herself. And she came home and immediately left the church and burned out, and it was too much.
Wow.
And I just thought, you know what, it is too much. It's too much to expect perfection from yourself and from others. Like, you will burn out, and it then becomes an all or nothing mindset.
Well said. So I credit you. There's not a lot of content in this space to do what you've accomplished. There's not a lot of church talks that sort of give space for gray. So I think what you've done personally and your willingness to share that helps other people. I'm in the same boat, Sarah. I've had to sort of rebuild my testimony multiple times since I stepped in the space of trying to support LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, because there's so much pain in that space and it's so complicated, as you know.
Yeah.
That I've had to sort of do what you're doing, and I've had to focus on God, our heavenly parents, and and Christ, because those are the rocks that have never failed me, but our institutional church at times does. It doesn't fail me. I'm in the middle of privilege. It hasn't really failed me, but it fails people that I love and care about, women, queer people, especially, that are sometimes having very different experiences than old white guys like me. A home run section was communication boundaries. No one has ever talked about that in 800 plus episodes. And I have enough former Mormon friends that talk about our lack of boundaries as active Latter-day Saints from a communication standpoint. And so you seem to have figured that out. And I love what you did with these sisters in your ward. You just, that's so disarming for someone to get a text and used to give them those options. It's so mature. It's so thoughtful. It's not manipulative. It's just trying to establish a foundation for communication going forward. We do that in the business world. We do that with other. And I just thought it was terrific. And I'm thinking of all the people receiving this text and how disarming it is. And I assume that some people just felt safe opening up to you, that said, okay, I can probably talk to Sara. If that's the first communication I've gotten, I'd like to actually have a conversation with somebody in the church. And this gives me the feeling that maybe I could talk to somebody, but I just thought that was great. I don't know if you want to say any more about that. It was just terrific.
It yielded really good results. I mean, there were these people that you have lists. A lot of being in a presidency, I think, in the church is a lot of lists, and it's a lot of admin. And it's especially, you have lists of people at their various activity levels. And we had these people that no one had heard from in years. We had no idea if the address was correct, if anything. And then part of that text that I didn't include in the original is, if this is the right number, please if this is the wrong number, you can disregard this. So when they sent the thumbs down, or they sent the hearts to check back in another 6 months, we knew, hey, this is the right number. At least we've confirmed that we're actually trying to get a hold of the right person, and this is where they're at. On missions, you have certain people that are on your do not contact list. And I think it's okay for wards to have that as well. I think it's okay for us to say, you know what, this person, wherever they're at, the way they're finding peace is creating these boundaries. And one of the most loving things you can do for a person is to respect their boundaries, whatever that means. And I have seen that. I've seen that with, once again, my dad. He works from home. He works out of his garage, and I've been there before, and the missionaries have stopped by. And I'm like, oh, this could get so interesting if we all let it. And he'll ask him, he'll say, do you guys want to come in for a coffee? Do you want to come in for a beer? And he just jokes with them, and they'll say, can we share a spiritual thought? And he goes, I'd rather you didn't. And they're like, well, could we say a prayer? And he goes, I can say one. And that man, you don't want that man to pray over a pulpit, because you don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. But if they're willing to joke with him and let his boundaries be his boundaries, then things work out for all of us. And I think meeting people where they're at is really, really productive.
This is a beautiful part of this story is your dad, and your love for your dad, your respect for his journey, and the way he's helped you with your journey. And boundaries is a really good one. I like where he said, you have felt it's not appropriate to unannounced go see people, and how difficult that was for your dad, even in the church. And I just think that's part of boundaries. We tried to do some at the YSA. We didn't have a lot of success. I had more success just DMing people. Yeah. It was less intrusive, and sometimes that led to wonderful conversations, and sometimes it led to just, I'm not interested, but it's less intrusive. And there may be exceptions to that, where there's stories of people that did show up. And I think if the Spirit really prompts you, but I think that would be the exception versus a general rule. So I think it's just a responsible thing to create boundaries. And sometimes we have to engage with people that have left the church to understand that side. Mm-hmm. I wrote in one of my books about, because I'm a market researcher by training, if we want to know how to improve Oreo cookies, we should probably do focus groups of people that quit eating Oreo cookies that used to consume a lot of them that don't, and try to understand by talking to them what happened.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's really awkward for us to listen to people that have separated themselves from the church. We don't want to hear those stories, but sometimes I think you're very comfortable, Sarah. You've heard enough stories and are comfortable with people in that space that it's not going to trigger you at this point. It doesn't trigger me at this point. But I often do get insights on what I could go back and be a better minister because of the insights they've given me. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you hear a lot growing up, and you hear a lot, especially on missions. Like, people will try to show you propaganda, or there will be anti-Mormon literature that you'll come across, and it's like, don't listen to that, don't read that, don't do anything like that. And I get that. I get where they're coming from with that. But I feel like you're right. Like, immersing yourself in being around people who have left, it's the only way to kind of learn. And I always want all of the information. And I always want all of the different perspectives. I don't think there's anything about church or church history that you could say that would shock me.
Yeah.
People will sometimes say they left the church because they didn't know this. And when my dad left the church, I said, okay, I'm going to read the CES letter. And that is something people don't want to do because they're afraid if you get the information, it'll put ideas in your head. Having all of the information, at least for me, has shown me that there are options out there. There are so many options. And so I know that I'm actively choosing my life instead of just shielding my eyes, putting on the blinders of, there's no sordid history there. There's no anything out there. I'm just living my life in ignorant bliss. And instead, I feel like you get to learn from these people. And if I were applying for a new job, I would want to know the person most recently who quit, why they quit. And I see that with new converts too, is I will bring them around people who have left the church and be like, you may come across these things, and that's okay. And it's okay to question. It's always okay to question. And the Lord loves effort, no matter what that looks like. And as long as you're trying and you're learning, I think the Lord rewards effort as well.
So well said. And I think perfect love casteth out fear. You probably have no fear about what you might learn, because you have enough understanding of the issues that you're not worried about some new thing. And not every person can handle that. Some call it inoculation. You've probably been inoculated because you know the stuff and you have a sustaining way going forward. And some may worry that the inoculation process will end people's testimonies. There's truth to that. And so there's just the reality. I sort of think, I remember my son came home from seminary and his teacher took on some really difficult topics, and I was so grateful, gospel topic essays, polygamy, I believe, and so grateful for the courage of that teacher to talk to our teenage son at that point about these topics, because I think it helps him in the long run versus, the approach probably I was under. Yeah. I love you talking about Heavenly Mother. The podcast that's going to be released after you is a woman that's written a book about Heavenly Mother, and but I just love that you brought her into the discussion as part of Mother's Day lesson. And I just feel so strongly about the role of Heavenly Mother in our doctrine, and that she's not happy that she's not being talked about. So I get really emotional when I think about Heavenly Mother and other people like, including you, that have talked about her and are doing everything you can to unhouse her or unveil her, as other of my guests have talked about. I don't think she wants to be veiled. In fact, this guest that's going to be a podcast after you, I believe, just talked about she was scared. One of the things as a young man growing up, I was taught I could become like Heavenly Father. She wants to become like Heavenly Mother, but she's going to have these children, but they're going to have no relationship with her.
That's incredibly powerful. Wow.
I never have thought about that. So when you talk about like that, so how you brought Heavenly Mother, and even how it blessed your brother. I believe Heavenly Mother is not just for women. Heavenly Mother is for all of us. And I also love, I'm bouncing back to this wonderful story of your non-binary friend, and how you even went to social media to talk about they, them, and you're honest with pronouns. It's been a journey for me too. But you just humanized this wonderful person. And, proximity is so important, listeners, to get to know queer people. That's certainly been part of my journey and your journey, except you started 30 years younger than I did. And you don't have to unlearn 30 years of stuff. So you give me hope for the future. But I love then the way you've, love our LGBTQ friends and recognize them as our own people and see firsthand their contributions. And I'm aware of some of the work you've done to help them shine, give lessons, teach, and lead, which to me is part of expanding the borders of Zion. I love this idea that some women want to be mothers and some don't, and everybody's going to have their own journey there. My wife used to, when we were in our YSA assignment, and I tried to do this too, we really wanted the women and the men, but more so the women, to feel whole and complete now, and not at some future date when they were married or had the degree or financial stability. We felt so strongly that our heavenly parents wanted them to feel whole and complete now. And that was just based on their divine nature as a child of heavenly parents and the completeness that should help them feel and the divinity in their soul. And yes, some still wanted to get married, and we all acknowledge that and recognize the pain that for many that was outside of their control. But we didn't want to add to the culture in our ward. We never talked about dating. We never kept score of how many marriages happened in the YSA ward. We were both married in our late 20s, so maybe that's part of our own journey, is navigating that in YSA wards, and how that was uncomfortable for both of us. So I love that you're doing that, and your own story is doing that. And are you okay with that? Would you like to add to that any parts of your personal story?
No, I love that too. It's been so interesting. So I've seen, especially with the awards, the changing of the age now being in kind of the older group. And I recently, about 2 months ago, I rewatched the singles ward and the singles second ward.
Oh, brave.
And I was like, okay, how much of this still applies? And so much of it still does, but also I've been so proud of the leadership, and I've been so proud of the like the bishoprics, and they really do a good job not making it, for lack of a better word, a meat market. And it sometimes still feels like it. And me and my friend in our ward, we tease, we have like the one ward hunk, and he's declared he's not dating within the ward, and we're like, that's a travesty. But I thought it would be a crime for me to not be married by 30. My mom, when I was 16, 17, she said, maybe if you're not married by 30, you look into adopting. And I look at that now and I'm like, oh my goodness, no, there's no way I would do that right now. And just, my mom got married at 20, and so many women of that generation did, in generations before. And I think we're getting married later, we're having kids later, and there's nothing wrong with the people that are in these, why I say wards older. Some of the best people I know, you look at them, and my initial reaction is, they're so great, how are they still single? And then I think, they're so great that they just want to keep hanging out with themselves. And that's how I am too, until I find somebody that makes me laugh as hard as I make myself laugh, and whose company I enjoy as much as myself. I went to the UK for a month by myself. I did not want anybody else around me. And I said, until I find that person that I want to spend a month in the UK with, I think I'm okay. And that is okay, because I can do the Lord's work on my own. And at the end of the day, I think something really important too is that the gospel is very individualized. It's about your individual testimony, and it doesn't depend on anybody else. we have a direct line to God for a reason. We have that direct prayer. You don't have to go through anybody else. And I don't have to go through my husband. I don't have to go through, when my mom got divorced, my grandma said to her, who is going to take you through the veil now? And she's like, well, I guess your dad can. Your dad can take you through the veil. And then my dad left the church, and I said, I don't know who's taking me through the veil, because my dad can't, and I don't have a husband. So at this point, I make the joke that I'm not getting into the highest degree of heaven because I don't have a man to take me through the veil. And in the end, I know that's not true. Like, the Lord, it's me and the Lord. And I know that whatever his plan is for me, I can get there. And at the very least, there are stripling warriors up there that still don't have wives. I'll just take one of them. It's great. And so I don't know. I love that the church is so individualized that way.
I just love listening to you. I get emotional, Sara, because you've got yourself in this place of deep self-acceptance, and you're not responding to cultural expectations for you, and which can make you feel behind or broken or not enough. And I love that you just completely own your own story. To me, hear him, that hashtag is just what Sara is doing. It's having this personal relationship with heavenly parents and charting our own story, and not succumbing or not being pressured by family expectations, cultural expectations that can make us feel like we're behind or not measuring up. And then this line you said, which is so powerful, I think I'm okay. You said that in a way it was complete conviction, is I'm okay. It doesn't mean I don't want to continue to progress and grow. And here you're in the uncomfortable zone of being in school so you can help other people. And I just think, you're awesome just the way you are. And I just wish more, and I wish what you're sharing would become normalized in our culture, so that people can just own their own story. And we're not trying to write their own story for them based on our own story of when we got married or what we think is right for somebody. We just sort of put our hands on their back figuratively and just say, I trust you as you're going forward, that you'll know how to do this, and I'll be your friend. I'll be there with you, and I just trust you as you're making your journey forward to know what's right for you. And without sort of my bias or cultural expectations, I wrote down here, Zion used to be sameness, listeners, for me, because I grew up, but now it's unity and purpose, and taking all the differences we have as Latter-day Saints and recognizing that that's good.
Yeah.
And unique personalities and unique experiences and people that might make us feel uncomfortable at church because they talk about Heavenly Mother or radical inclusion or being kind to non-binary people, which to me is what Jesus did. He made people feel uncomfortable in his ministry. But to me, that's part of the growth we need to experience as a body of saints, because we're able to reach more people as we're unified, but taking all these differences and recognizing that God's pretty big into differences and how that is part of Zion. So you give me hope, Sara, for the future of our church, for the future of the world. I'm so glad that Peggy Fletcher Stack connected with you and has had you on Mormon Land a couple times. And I hope your voice in our community continues to grow and you have more chances to share your thoughts, not only in official church settings, but just in other circles, because you really are helping. Any thoughts in closing? Any that you want to share?
Oh, I don't think so. I feel like I've done a lot of sharing. I feel good though, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think when I look at it, when I came back from my mission, when I was struggling with that, I wish I could go back in time and tell 20-year-old me that things get infinitely harder before they get better, but they're better because of it. And so, yeah, just, I don't know how many young listeners there are. I don't know anything about demographics or that way, but I just hope that they know that things get better, and it may take getting old, like my siblings tell me I'm getting old, but you gain this perspective, and if you like I said before, like at the end of the day, it's just you and the Lord. And that's all that you can really ask for. And so whatever that looks like for you is what it needs to look like.
It's great. Thank you so much, Sara Sumsion. Thank you, our listeners, for listening and sharing this podcast with others as we work just to help everybody feel welcome, loved, and needed. And thank you for listening. And this is Richard Osler and Sara Sumsion signing off another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.